Welcome to the Circularity Series Podcast. Today, we're talking about from bottle to bottle, what it really takes to make recycling work. I'm joined by my colleagues Margaret Bates, Adrian, Whyle and Adam Herriott for this session. Brilliant. Well, thank you all so much for joining today. It's a real pleasure to have you here. It'd be great if each of you could just give a brief introduction to yourselves. I'd love to learn a bit more about your career journey to date as well, and what recycling means to you.
So I'll jump in first. So Adam Herriott, I'm currently the interim joint head of packaging at WRAP, which seems like a lovely long job title, but normally I'm nice and simply senior specialist. So at WRAP, I predominantly help run the UK Packaging Pact, was previously the UK Plastics Pact, which works with the whole plastic supply chain to try and improve how we use plastics, how we recycle it, how we implement reuse and refill, how we can increase recycled content, that sort of stuff, and that's very much fulfilling into the packaging pact as well, but looking at all materials too. So we're not just focusing on one, because we're material agnostic. There's no bad material. It's just the right choices for the right job.
Thank you, Margaret.
Hi, I'm Margaret Bates, breaking up the only people with starting their names with an A in the room.
Hadn't spotted that.
So my background is very much in waste and resources. I've been in the sector for 40 odd years now. I used to be a university professor teaching waste management, circular economy, a number of other things, and did projects all over the world. Then I went to OPRL, which are the people who put the recycle, do not recycle labels on. And then they started to talk about EPR, and actually became a bit more of a reality. And so I went on to comment to DEFRA to set up PAC UK, the EPR scheme administrator, finished doing that at the end of last year, and since then have been doing a number of different projects on all sorts of things, from novel materials to a global packaging review, setting up strategies for public sector bodies and all sorts of other fun things that don't keep me out of trouble.
Good. Excellent, thank you. Adrian.
So I'm Adrian Whyle. My career is really focused around new product development and innovation. Worked for about 30 years in the polymer sector. The last 20 years has been in sustainability and resource efficiency. Today I'm Vice Chair with Recoup. I'm Technical Advisor to the BPF. I have the privilege of sitting on a number of university industrial advisory boards. I'm really passionate about recycling. We need to get these resources back, and not just in terms of plastics, but all materials, if we're going to leave a future fit planet.
Thank you. Well, that leads me on to directly to my first question. You say resources for the future planet. Why don't we go back to the basics? What does good recycling actually mean to each of you? We have phrases like recyclable, closed loop, net zero, a number of big buzzwords out there. But when you think of recycling, what does that mean specifically for you?
I'm happy to jump in first.
Yes, please.
So for me, good recycling is not... it's a number of things. It's not generating material or packaging that we don't need, but then we're recycling, so it's okay that we're wasting resources, because you're always going to get process losses. It's not about pushing out reuse, but it's about taking the material where we're using it, and recycling is the best environmental option for it, and ideally turning it back into the same thing again, so that we maintain the quality and we keep that thing in circulation. So it's about really valuing the stuff that we're using rather than treating them as just a disposable item.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to say ditto, but with maybe a slight slant on it. So I completely agree with Margaret, because there's not much I disagree with her for my sins, maybe. But I'd also say, I think there's a difference between good recycling and recycling, kind of what Margaret's alluded to. So I don't think there's anything wrong with material going into being recycled into, say, something else that wasn't its original use, as long as it's replacing virgin resource, virgin material, I think that's a good thing. I think I think as a society, people get far too hung up on, oh, well, if we're recycling it, we're good, we're fine. That's just too easy. That's not really what we should be doing. We should be looking at, like, is the material needed in the first place? Like, looking at that waste hierarchy, looking at so elimination or prevention, going to reuse, refill, but then that last step should be the recycling to try and keep it in the economy as long as possible and not letting it drop out into incineration or landfill or wherever else it might end up going. And you say, try and keep that value in for as long as possible. And we know there's not many materials that you can infinitely recycle. So try and keep that value in there and keep it as high grade as possible.
Sure.
Yeah, I think you've covered a lot of the areas that I would have thought about. But for me, recycling, it is about keeping those materials in circularity for as long as possible, but to do it in a responsible fashion so that the worker conditions are properly respected. And we start at the beginning of a product's life cycle, looking at how do we design that product to ensure that it can be properly recycled at the end of life. Just recycling per se isn't the answer. We need to maximise the value of the materials that we get at the end of that product life cycle.
From the start of the product, not just once someone's decided they're throwing it away.
And how much do you think apathy impacts? You talked about consumers not being aware of what's in recycled packaging, but flipping that on the other side where people are like, well, why do I care? You're going to export it anyway. So how much of that needs to be looked at in the grand scheme of things to say, what about the human behavioural aspect? We can put policies in place, we can put procedures and education, but bad news travels quickly. So therefore, with the influence of social media and all these other areas where facts are misconstrued, misrepresented, and also people now taking, I guess, an influencer as gospel, for example.
Yeah.
How do you think there needs to be some focus around that because is that an element of apathy being created? So actually, I don't care. You can educate me all you like about what's in that, and I'll make some decisions. But you're still going to export it, or I feel you're going to export it. And do you think there's something there that needs to be addressed to bridge that gap?
I can definitely jump in here first. So obviously at WRAP we've got the Recycle Now brand, and we run Recycling Week each year. But one of the other things we do as well, we have a recycling tracker where we go out and we survey the country effectively of their attitudes around recycling, their behaviours, so we can get an idea of where does focus need to be. And we've certainly seen over the last 5, 6, 7 years, the apathy around recycling, the worthwhileness of recycling is continuing to drop. It was sort of like as a sort of like a plateaued of people understand it, they like it, they get it, but we're seeing over time now.
What's causing it?
I think there's a huge amount of different things. I think one is just general media and social media. It's easy to find stories nowadays. Obviously, good news stories don't travel as far as or as fast as bad news stories. It's like we're all in the room, we know the realities of the sector, and yes, there are some bad actors, but they are the minority. But they will get the stories about those will come out, and they'll be fast. You don't hear the stories on like BBC on the front page of Daily Mail about, oh, you set up a recycling plant and it's going well. But you will hear about, oh, someone has sent one shipment to somewhere and it's been found on the beach.
Completely exaggerated. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, but it's what's getting the attention, and that's what's impacting behaviour.
Exactly.
But I think there's also responsibility for the recycling industry, which sounds really unfair, because I think a lot of the public think the recycling sector can recycle anything.
Yes.
They think it doesn't matter what we do, and that's where I think the work on green claims is so important, and having standards about what we put on, and the legislation that's coming in that basically says if it's not recyclable in Europe, you can't put it in the market. We might not follow that, but we are going to make it more expensive.
Margaret, you mentioned one thing about green claims. I'm not familiar with that, so could you explain what that means or what that's about?
So we have a green claims code.
Okay.
And basically that says you've got what you're putting on your packaging needs to be the truth.
Right.
Which seems like really obvious, and I think the public assume that that's the case, but it's not. And there are claims that people put on their packaging that really aren't supported by the science or the data.
Right.
So then they can be prosecuted for that. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of resources available for it.
Right.
But I do think the threat counts.
Okay.
And the new European regulations say that you can't put a claim on that just means you're legally compliant.
Right.
So you can't say, oh, I've got 30% recycled content when the legal requirement is that you have 30% recycled content.
Right.
You can only put a claim on it when you're doing better than
In
your
the base
obligation.
minimum. Okay.
I think you make some really interesting points there about, especially the green claim stuff, because I think it kind of goes both ways a little bit, doesn't it? So I think it's overall it's a great thing, and it means that people aren't going to be greenwashing or claiming stuff that is just completely untrue. On the flip side, obviously, there's been previous examples where it's not just what is true; it's also what the consumer can reasonably understand as well. So there's been examples of large drinks manufacturers putting on their bottles made of recycled content. Or this bottle was made of recycled content, which completely true. That PET bottle was made with 100% recycled content. However, the PP cap does not have recycled content because it can't. The label doesn't have recycled content in it. So they were then
Where's
forced
that
out
recycled content come from?
Yeah, well, but because they were never actually claiming that. That those bits they're saying the bottle has recycled content, and they got sort of penalised for that. But I think that, and then that also then has a flip side where some brands that I've worked with, who they're doing some incredible stuff for their packaging and getting recycled content in, or changing the design so it could be collected across the whole country, but they're too afraid to put that claim on because they don't want to then get caught up with the green claims as well. So it does have on the flip side where some won't make the claims. But then others have said to me, interestingly, I've been in meetings with OPRL with them as well, was, it's not recyclable yet, but it's going to be under simple recycling in 2-3 years' time, or whatever it was back at the time, back when we were talking about it. So it's like, so we're going to put recycle ready. It's like, well, what does that mean? So all it's telling me is that it's not recyclable now. So that's just confusing the consumer and trying to claim something that is just not true.
But that's where I think mandatory labelling that we're going to bring in under EPR soon, hopefully, will be useful, because it's a legal thing that you'll be putting a label on that says legally whether that can be recycled or not. And I think it's interesting that if we make sure that there's space for innovation in that as well, because what we don't want to do in such a fast evolving field such as packaging and recycling, make that static. We need to accept how much it changes. And I mean, you're talking about bottle to bottle recycling. And we all know that mechanical makes much more sense carbon wise, but the changes that are happening in chemical recycling and dissolution are opening up some other avenues in there, and we can't stop them being able to have access to the market if we're going to grow.
Absolutely. I mean, look, chemical recycling has its role and place, and I think from my side and how I look at this is that there's a place for everybody to make a difference. We will do mechanical, but what we want to make sure is that we do mechanical to the best of its ability, prove that, make sure that's working. That gives us then the headspace to say, well, let's explore chemical, let's look at other innovations. I think fundamentally my industry can't even get the basics right, so therefore it then leads to export issues and challenges, and then it's this conundrum saying, well, how do we think about innovation, and when actually I can't get access to that material? So where does that work? So it's always it's ensuring that there's real synergy between the parties. And look, I think chemical has an important part and should be have a seat at the table. When, how, etc. I'm keen to understand how the technology evolves, because there needs to be collaboration. Otherwise, working in silos is going to continually create a fragmented system.
I'd completely agree with you, Ahmed. It's difficult to imagine a form of chemical recycling from a carbon perspective that could compete with mechanical recycling. So for those grades of material that can't be mechanically recycled, I think it's opening up a lot of new opportunities.
Oh, definitely.
You asked a question also about behaviour change and citizen apathy. When Blue Planet 2 was aired, I thought the bounce back from this will be really good. the shock and awe of that programme in every household in the UK surely is going to change people's behaviours. There'll be less littering, there'll be improvements in recycling rates. Absolutely not.
No.
So if that doesn't work, we have to really fundamentally look at our whole theories of behaviour change. Professor Leslie Henderson at Strathclyde University is bringing some fresh thinking into this space. But our traditional models of behaviour change, nudge theory, etc., they're just not working. So I think it needs a really deeper level of understanding.
How is that? How do we do this? Because, I understand the role of EPR in contributing to that. We've got a deposit return scheme coming. How is that really going to be successful if there's an apathetic attitudes towards going to recycle and saying, well, why should I bother? Why will people bother? I've heard different parties. I mean, in the industry, people are very excited, but when I talk to friends, family, etc., they're like, well, what's DRS? What return back? Oh yeah, I did something back. Milk bottles. But for a scheme that's going live next year, it seems to be and this is a very small, pool of people I've spoken to, but there's no knowledge of it. So if you're saying there's apathy towards it, what from a behavioural perspective do we think needs to be done earlier to make sure when DRS goes live, there's a real camaraderie to get behind the system? Because I think it's brilliant, and I think it can bring everybody together. If we bring a social impact aspect to it as well, people can donate towards their charitable cause. We can start at schools and, grassroots behaviour, get people into these habits from day one and retrain future generations from the outset. But given all of those aren't retail based, if we take the pipe dream to one side and say, well, we've got an apathetic society potentially, we've got one channel which is retail, what else do we need to do to change behaviour to get them to actually get to the shops?
I think we've got to make it as easy as possible for them. We're looking at reverse vend machines. And if I'm a single parent and I've got 40 or 50 bottles to take back and I don't drive, that's a hell of a challenge. I was talking with Polytag, and they're doing some trials at looking at a digital DRS system where you could actually scan your bottle at home with your phone app and put it in the bin. I'm not saying that's the answer, but other solutions other than installing large pieces of equipment in stores, have to be explored. For a lot of stores also, they've got great challenges in terms of where do they site those, the foot traffic, the loss of retail space. So I think we need a selection of different DRS, return systems. And Margaret, you were saying earlier about the plastics packaging tax, which is shaping a lot of thinking around increasing recycled content and increasing the rate and the recycling cut-off, which I think are all good measures. But that money doesn't come back to the recycling industry. And going back to your point, where we've got price volatility, surely that could be a mechanism to iron out those peaks and troughs. So it's economic to invest in UK recycling. We've lost over 400,000 tonnes of recycling capacity because it's cheaper to export those materials.
Okay, and I have to then compete with those prices.
Yeah.
So can I challenge some of the things around making it easier?
Yeah.
I get we need to make it easier. And I think one of the things we really need to be much more careful at is a lot of our environmental solutions are nice middle class environmental solutions. And if we're going to make it work, we need to make it work for everyone.
Yeah, every member.
But I've spoken to people who won't bother to return it. Doesn't matter, they won't bother.
Yeah.
You look at the figures in Ireland on their unredeemed deposits.
66 million euros.
Euros,
Yeah.
66 million euros of unredeemed deposits. So that's however many millions of
10% of or 5% of our population equivalent. So
Yeah,
so
did
we'll have 650 million sat there.
really weren't bothered.
Yeah.
And I think that's very telling, because what we're effectively trying to find is sustainable solutions to unsustainable lifestyles. So the same show I went to with the shiny packaging, the amount of stuff where the proportion of thing you were buying was covered in 90, maybe had 10% sweet and 90% disposable toy that went with it. Or one of my friends was came to my house and said, "Have you seen these? Have you seen these electronic lollipops?
Oh, yeah.
Bone conduction lollipops, which play 3 tunes for an hour,
God.
and then you throw them away." And she was saying, "Isn't this great?" And my husband was giving me a look, and I went, "It's not been very popular in my sector." But we're not thinking about that. And what I'd like to see in the future with EPR is where we actually get to it, not just for, and this is a pipe dream, by the way, not just for how recyclable it is, but how much we actually need that thing. So it doesn't matter if a blood bag is recyclable. It is the best thing for that. Great. But a random thing that you buy for Easter or Halloween that lasts for maybe 2 hours, I think it should be really expensive because you don't need it.
Yeah.
And we've got loads of stuff we don't need. And we need to be careful, because I do agree with making it easy for consumers, but I think they also need to understand that without their part in the circular economy, there isn't a complete circle and it breaks. And digital DRS, I think, is really interesting to look at. But one of the advantages of DRS is the quality of the material. So if the material is then mixed with all the same old other stuff, are we still going to have the quality? Are we still going to manage that bottle-to-bottle recycling? So I think we need to look at it from the whole life cycle rather than just the increase in participation rate.
I think that's a good point. And simple recycling is going to get us in that direction. As we move to DRS, then we're going to completely reshape our waste bins and increase the costs for treating our recyclable bin, as a lot of those valuable materials are removed.
But
so it's complex, isn't it?
It is complex, but what do we think are going to be, some of the big behavioural changes that need to happen?
Behaviour change perspective, we need to go, rather than thinking, right, how do we make it simpler or how do we do this or whatever, go back to why the DRS for the UK was actually proposed in the first place. It wasn't material quality. It wasn't necessarily increasing recycling rates. It was to stop littering. So, if people are littering that material, you've got to target why they were littering in the first place. So, what needs to do to stop them from littering? Then you can have a look at what are the other added benefits? Is a PET bottle, an aluminium can, the right formats, materials to be going for if littering is the aim? Or should it be, not that I think it would necessarily work, but should it be cigarette butts, or should it be crisp packets? Or what could work really well for vapes. We all know that vapes are a massive challenge for the industry.
Glass bottles.
Glass bottles, yeah. See, Wales are going down at one particular.
Yeah, which
is obviously going to cause its own challenges in terms of a system that works across the whole UK. So I think that that's a whole other aspect in terms of behaviour change. If you live in Chester, but then you're going into Wrexham, or what material are you doing? What's happening to that?
It's interesting to look at the research and people's opinions, because it'd be really interesting to explore more why they're apathetic. And I think part of it might be what was mentioned earlier about, bad news carries better. So we're in a position where people don't necessarily feel that what they'll do will make a difference. And I think there's a general concern that bad things are happening in the world that people can't influence. So it would be nice to see some positive messaging that says, if you take your bottle back for them, not only do you get your deposit back, but that means that material will then be available to go into another bottle. So we're using less of these, fossil resources that are causing wars in various parts of the world, because we've got it in the UK. And then we've got quality stuff, and we're keeping manufacturing in the UK. And you might not need your 20 pence, but that's fine because your local charity would really like it and you can donate to them. But I think we need to start making people feel that they have a responsibility and that they can make a difference.
And I think that's really important, Margaret, but that falls flat on its face when there's no infrastructure to recycle. So it's that conundrum to say we get these people and this is my whole concern, is that can the infrastructure catch up quick enough to ensure that these statements, and we're saying to people all these very valid points, but then they go do that. And then they realise it's still been exported.
I think that's really interesting because you could, so disincentivise the export of our own materials because we need those to make our own products. And maybe imported material, then imported packaging, for example, would be required to have UK-sourced recycled content. So the recycled material could be produced to a standard and be shipped as a product to include in their own product.
I mean, that's the direction the EU are looking at. So they're going to be bringing in very strict rules about recycled content, and there's different bits for recycled content depending on whether it's contact sensitive or medical or whatever. But they've said that that needs to be EU sourced. So there is that more virtuous circle. What's not quite clear is what Europe means in that context yet. So there's the way the European regs are bringing it in. They've brought in this, frankly, enormous document. And then over the next 14 years, they'll be bringing in a number of enabling acts that makes things a lot clearer, or hopefully make things a lot clearer. I'm not sure they always will. But talking about, so that will mean that where we were saying before about being able to import stuff that doesn't really comply, but they've said it does, so that's fine, is it's going to bring in much stricter standards. And so that should really help if we do similar, and I think we're likely to, partly because I think if you work in this field, you have to be optimistic because otherwise you're just going to be sitting in the corner crying. But also we're talking about a deposit management organisation for DRS and a producer responsibility organisation for EPR, both which have representation from some big brands on them. And those big brands want interoperability.
Just to come on to that, yeah.
They want to be able to transfer stuff. So they don't want a different rule, and this goes back to the DRS in Wales, but they don't want a different rule between different parts of the United Kingdom. They want to have the same stuff that they're putting on the market in England, Northern Ireland and Ireland. And then we've got Windsor Framework issues as well. So we're not totally independent anyway. But also they want to be able to make the same stuff.
Exactly.
They want economies of scale, so it doesn't matter if it's going on the market there or there. It's effectively the same bottle.
Yep.
Just to try and be a little bit provocative, maybe. I'm not suggesting this is my viewpoint, but it's an interesting point. We were talking about material export and things like that. Obviously, we work in like a global market. Polymers, PET bottles, massive global, valuable global commodity. So, like, obviously, what happens material is largely driven by market forces and the free market, and the fact that someone in Germany might be more willing to pay than someone in Coventry or something like that. I mean, I was having a conversation with someone. They're saying, okay, so if everything gets exported and the plastics reprocessing capacity in the UK just collapses because they can't afford it. Again, not saying this is my opinion, but would that be a bad thing, or is that's just markets, and that's just business, right?
Yeah,
So
but it defeats the object of, you said the DRS was set up to reduce littering. I've heard the DRS was set up to promote circular economy. Now, if you then export, that just defuncts circular economy. It's an oblong
does
economy.
it defunct circular
Because you want
economy,
to keep
you want local loops,
then you bring
but
out-
you do need larger loops as well.
But you're talking about you're talking about reinvigorating the UK systems, the British public. We are very different to our European counterparts. So therefore, exporting it, I think, will just add to it will put businesses like us out, but you will get a much bigger backlash on recycling rates because people are, well, why should I? Because it's being exported.
So I would agree. I agree with Adam. By the way, it was a litter thing. In the 1970s, when DRS were first brought in, nobody had heard of the circular economy, and we do have a disparity for where the material arises and where the demand is. So what we're talking about, containers going back to China fully loaded, but maybe we need to look at other supporting mechanisms, like that your packaging was made in the UK. So like we have a little packaging made in the UK label for where we sell, because a lot of people in the UK want to support the United Kingdom and want to see, that there are jobs and manufacturing here as well.
And arguably even more so in the current geopolitical climate where,
Exactly.
every meeting we all go to, like, can you remember the last meeting you went to where people didn't talk about resilience for the UK or the UK and Europe with everything that's going on, needing to make sure we've got our own resources in check so we can be self-sufficient now, all that sort of talk.
But the challenge is we're importing 40 to 50% of goods in packaging from outside of the UK. So I like the idea of made and remade in the UK, but if we hold on to our materials, we should be able to do that with our own product. Additionally, if we're exporting our materials for packaging that's being imported into the UK, we've got that chain of custody. We're also importing materials from outside of Europe. And I want to be confident that the product that I'm using or the packaging I'm using has got recycled content, has been collected under humane conditions. And I think that is another question that we have to think about, not necessarily for this discussion, but we have a responsibility, don't we, to our supply chain.
Because you don't have that control across the supply chain fully once it's left home. So therefore, what do you call a sustainable supply chain? Because are you actually going to go to some of these facilities in the Far East or Africa and see what happens, and what their law might be is okay and compliant is completely different to ours. So it causes more, I think, there's more problems exporting it than keeping it at home.
But also we've now got other issues as well where I was talking to someone who works in the food service sector, and they manufacture in the UK, but their clients can directly import. So especially for smaller business, you can buy stuff now that doesn't actually ever go through the UK control systems. We've got not only in packaging, but there are a number of online systems where, frankly, you look at the price of what you're buying, and if you think it's produced at that price in any kind of sustainable or ethical way, you're living on a different planet. But it's also about what people can afford, and so it's how we do that joined up stuff. And it's always the problem with wider sustainability, isn't it? That you look at clothing, for example, and you see people saying, well, look, mud jeans, you buy them and you can wear them forever. Or like Patagonia will repair your coat. Yes, so I've got a Patagonia coat and Patagonia will repair it. It cost me a lot more
To repair
well, Patagonia in itself, because I like the brand and the ethics, but I can afford to pay that. My friends can't. So they'll buy something that delivers the same thing at a price they can afford. And we need to make sustainability not the expensive option.
Yeah, and that was always in my mantra, it's sustainability for the privileged. That's not going to work, because the percentage of privileged is far smaller than unprivileged, and that's the thing. It's that when you're looking at the grand scheme of things, actually, there are. And especially when I go up at this London bubble to Ellesmere Port and I see my facility and everything else, and I'm like, oh God, I can see living. And I'm recruiting actively, and I'm seeing that the spread of society and what is privilege and what is not, and it's quite scary. But I think ultimately there is, despite that, I think there is a fundamental intent from public to want to see things improve and things to get better. And I think the narrative of Britain is broke to let's get back to Great Britain, I think something like a DRS system could really bring everyone together and really unite.
Right wing with it.
Sorry?
As long as we don't go right wing with
Yeah,
it.
of course.
So that, cause I think there's always a bit of an issue when you have that kind of thing, that you end up moving into a sort of right wing Trump type agenda, don't you?
Course.
But I think we forget when we're talking about sustainability that sustainability isn't just environmental sustainability. There are a number of other pillars. And as Adrian was saying, social is like a really, really important one.
Huge part.
And when we're talking about this, we're all embedded in this. We get it. We see it. And we're saying, the trouble is not that if we do that, that will happen. So I think we need to be very careful that we don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And maybe we do need to do some reframing when we think about the circular economy in terms of working to more localism, because often we talk about circular economy and we do not consider the journeys that these materials go to get reincorporated into a final product.
Yeah, I think, the whole, we've talked broadly, a big aspect about behavioural change, trust, and I think what needs to happen at central government needs to be so localised to people's individual lifestyles. And then that can be done where, this is because they say it takes a village, communities, and there are communities when they work together. So somebody leading and saying, well, this works for this community, we'll do it. This is what we'll do to change that behaviour. This work. We can't just have a one size fits all. And I think pushing those, because despite some of the poverty challenges, there are some very generous people, and there's a lot of people who want to give back and make a difference. But not everybody wants to shout about it. You've got a lot of people who've got the discretion of wanting to do stuff, but they don't need to do that. And you've got obviously this new social media influencer world who, will, have closed the door for someone and there'll be a whole post and story about it and a million people liking, saying that's great. But, the reality is communities can make differences, and it's localizing stuff for each one to say, well, in Birmingham or this district, our DRS is slightly different because we've partnered with this charity to do X, Y, Z. In London, we're doing it differently, but the fundamental concept is still there, is that, we take back, you get your deposit, but it's looking at that socio-demographic background and say, well, what's going to motivate them to do that?
I think that's the difference between sort of behaviour change and making sure that you're treating people as the individual or an area as the localised area, and then there's the system change, because obviously we talked about interoperability across the whole UK. We don't want to have 4 different DRS systems across the UK, but then likewise, just in England, for example, we don't want a different DRS system in every town, city and village. So it needs to be a standard. It needs to be localised to a point.
Yeah.
Maybe that's how you have the conversation around it and how you talk about it to a particular town, village or whoever or individual to get them to really engage and feel passionate about it. But at a wider systems level, it needs to be non-identical. It needs to be the same materials, same on-pack labelling.
Absolutely.
If you're Coke or PepsiCo or whatever, you don't want to have multiple different labels, languages, or language rather, on it. It's difficult enough to get them to put a recycle label on, let alone something else.
The incentivization needs to be more bespoke.
Yeah.
The fundamental infrastructure needs to be there. Everything that EPI is doing with DRS, all of that needs to have that. The brands and everybody needs to work together. Because if that's confusing, then everything else gets confused. But then to the point where we have a foundation, we have a baseline. Everybody gets it well in our world. and then taking that to the wider world with some elements of finessing here, there, I think would be a great way to create the right camaraderie in society without going right wing or keeping it apolitical, to say, well, actually, you know what, I am going to take my bottles back because there's a lovely charity in my community and I see the work that they're doing, and I'm going to rally other parents and we'll do this together. I mean, it's our little bubble that we've done something good about.
I can definitely see a world, like thinking about where I live, where people do you know what, I can't be bothered to take those bottles back to the shop, but what I can be bothered to do is drop them off at the collection point by the food bank. Mm-hmm. And so I'll do that because I never remember to buy the stuff to drop off at Co-op where there is a food bank collection. But I'll drop my bottles off at the church as I go past, and then I know that I'm helping poorer people in my community, and actually I can live with myself not having bothered to take my bottles.
Or drop them off at the school, and then it's going to raise funds for your children's school. But I think RAP had a really good idea. It's strapline. I think it was RAP about love where you live, and I love that. I thought that is a really good strap line for getting people to engage in their communities, and that is something you could go back to, and it fits in with your beliefs about social values and making a difference to your local communities.
The one thing, what I love about DRS, it brings every single person together because it's something that we all use in our day-to-day lives. And that was my fundamental reason why I set up Enviru, was because I wanted to work with a product that, for me, sustainability is about longevity, that I can create something long-term that, A, will be reused again and again, but I can create jobs, I can create people. Now,
you can't create people.
Sorry,
well, you can
people.
strictly, but you know.
Not this podcast.
Well, I could create long-term jobs for people. And because when I worked in electronics, it was just up and down all the time. And I think it could really, it's a brilliant platform to unite people, because there's no, as I said, there's no religious implications, no social implications. It's not something that the middle classes do or the poor. We all will use this material, cans and bottles. I think it's a fantastic platform that can create change. I think perhaps that whole aspect of what we just talked about, doing something locally, should be trialed sooner, to say, well, look, this is going to be coming in the future, but maybe let's have pockets of trials to see how people's behaviour change. So when it does go live, it's not a shock to the system or a shock to society, because we all think everybody knows about it because we talk about it. But from the people I talk to, people are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Like we could all, at the moment, ourselves, we could probably afford a couple of extra pounds on a shop, that's going to thing. But a lot of people can't. Yeah. So DRS isn't realistically going to have an impact on, certainly right on the upper 1%.
Yeah.
It's not going to have too much of an issue, a push on us. But it is going to disproportionately impact those on a lower economic scale.
And that's the 15 to 20 million in food and or fuel poverty in the UK. It's not insignificant.
Yeah, so it's quite a lot. So then I think you could argue there's certainly a social impact of DRS, because there's going to be certain things that they might not be able to afford, be it because they have to buy this product which now has an extra 20p on per item, and therefore they can't now afford to buy something else because they've only got a certain budget, or it might be they just can't afford to buy X, Y, and Z anyway. So I think you can argue there's almost an ethical part of that, and I think obviously if Exchange changed sort of announcing that it's going to be a 20p deposit, I think that makes a really interesting dynamic, because you can argue for some people 20p is not going to make a difference at all. Yeah. They're either going to recycle it, don't recycle it, litter it, or not. But then you don't want to increase it to make them do it, because you get people at the lower end
who are
completely priced out of everything. Yeah. And I think that's
taking it to an even more basic level. School meals will go up because of the DRS, unless, did you suggest we have a system that's flexible enough that allows?
But that's exactly my points, was that sustainability, these policies are developed in a bubble world, yet the reality of society and who it impacts, it needs to really factor that in. And I think But what I was saying is that if done correctly, DRS can still unite that
Yes.
20 million
Yeah.
people to say, the 20 million who can afford it could be like, actually, I can help these guys. But if we put the infrastructure in for these guys who can't afford it, it won't have such a big impact, because if they could do it in their school or in tower blocks where the bottom of the lobby, etc., you're bringing everybody together.
That's what I was thinking with the food bank example. I think also there is, we won't know till we do it, but I think there is also the possibility, and I hope it's a reality, that one of the reasons that people are apathetic about recycling is because they don't feel they're doing anything. They feel disengaged from the process, and they maybe don't trust it. Whereas I think the actual action of taking something and putting it in and getting money back makes you feel that this is a process that has an economic role to play, that I am now engaged in it. I understand why I'm doing it, and they wouldn't be paying me if it wasn't actually getting recycled, would they?
Yeah.
So I wonder if there'll be a positive uplift in people's approaches to recycling and that behaviour change on other materials or other formats, because people now feel that it is an activity that's worthwhile.
They're more engaged. And
Yeah.
part
And
of the fisky part of it, yeah.
I think something like an app to support that would be fantastic, where
Except then you go back to Adrian's point about people in poverty and without access to those.
You'd be surprised how...
And in total honesty,
I
don't want another app. I'm had it up to here with I'm trying to buy a lint roller. Do you want an app for that? No, I want one that just works.
yeah, but there's so many. The thing is that we have got we've got an aging population, and we have got so many different people adopting different things, and it doesn't have to be. Again, it goes back to that point of earlier of localization and being more targeted. So with the AI age and the social media age, if they had an app to say, well, I'll put that bottle in. They get a cool carbon footprint calculation. They've got a choice of charities to say, look, I'll give it to this charity because, these bottles will give somebody a hot meal or a coffee or something, or I can plant some trees.
But they can make that decision at the RVM.
Yeah.
Well, you've got to factor
RVM,
in then.
But then...
So the RVM, you can have them. So the RVMs, you choose whether to give it to a charity or not.
And they do that in
And
Ireland
what
as
I'd
well.
be worried about your option is that in your carbon footprint, are you going to remove or include the carbon of the data centres to provide all the information to give that?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's really exciting that's coming in alongside, and Tesco's are pioneering this as well, is the move from linear to digital barcodes. I think that's really, so you don't need an app, you just need a QR code, need a camera.
Yeah.
So it's fine, because let's be honest, it's about more information, not vital information. Yeah. So I think how brands and retailers and maybe others use that source of, you can put a huge amount. I remember Polytag telling me how much data you can put behind, and it was like, right, I don't understand, you're talking about far too big a number.
Thousands of characters.
Yeah, exactly.
Information.
But then that brings another challenge with your green claims. Because green claims on pack, okay, I can see it, I can verify them. What about all the green claims you put behind the bottle?
Yeah. And I think that whole innovation space, it's really fascinating. I'm looking at, in terms of advanced recycling at the moment, supporting a couple of spin-outs from Oxford and Cambridge. Really exciting, but very early TRL level, a technology readiness level, concepts which we're probably looking at 5-10 years before they realised. The Centre for Enzyme Innovation down in Portsmouth, which I do a lot of work with, they're looking at enzymes for recycling, not for bottles, but maybe for textiles. When you've got polyester cotton, and now you can take the polyester out of that, and you would end up with a cotton stream and
the novel material coatings where it needs to be so thin that it's not really feasible to recycle it, but make it out of something else that dissolves. I mean, the innovation space is really exciting. I do, and I sound like about 852 though. I do sometimes look at people and go, how can you be so clever and so young?
Yes.
But there is a real dynamism in the sector about people trying to be the change they want to see.
Yeah.
But then we come up with another challenge of like in the UK, we are brilliant at that early stage stuff, developing in some like, oh, this is a great concept. We now need to commercialise it. And then there's just a dearth of any resource
And that's
when it gets
that's
taken
the
off in
problem.
someone else.
The innovation is there. The intent is there. Yeah. We have got some seriously smart people in this country, but taking it from concept to getting someone to fund it, it's impossible. And that needs to be looked at to say, how do we fund that? And I've got two personal examples. One is me getting my own project funded because I had proven technology. Any innovation was like, okay, that's nice to have, but I want this. And it took us, the amount of reports and documents to do to justify all of that. I got funded, so it was a success story. But I was just finessing, in essence, a broken system. I didn't, I was looked at and said, "Where's it broken? How do we fix this?" My father, who's now a retired neuroscientist, was looking at brain cancer cures, but his funding got pulled. He was on the cusp of getting that cure. He retired, and it didn't go forward. So I agreed that we've got the innovation, but there needs to be a bigger commitment from whether it's from government, industry, investors to say, we've got this innovation is going to be really, really important. But I think the trigger to making that work is doing it without overcomplicating it.
I mean, how much money do we think the bone conduction speaker lollipops took to bring to market?
Exactly.
And it's worrying that can get that resource.
Yeah.
And the things that we need maybe can't. Sorry, Adrian.
No, I think what I was sort of reflecting on was we've talked about ring fencing some of that money, so that could be put into some kind of financial instrument to sort of kickstart some of these innovations. In my early career, we developed a really innovative product that was going into rigid pipes. We couldn't get anybody to test it in Europe. We actually moved everything over to the States. And it was a great success there because there was a willingness to try the new. I'm not saying it's still like that today. This was in the 80s, but there's elements of that.
Yeah.
So there's two elements, the willingness to try the new, but also the funding, and perhaps funding to encourage people to break into their production cycles and the cost that takes to try some new innovations. But ring fencing that money, not just for translation of those innovations into impact, but also to develop those innovations as well.
Or maybe there's new ways we could look at these financial mechanisms. So yes, we've spoken before about obviously HMT with the plastics packaging tax. How we'd love to see it the pence of the 230 or whatever it is now ring fenced or whatever it might be. But actually, if we think about PAC UK and the PRO, they're going to have millions and millions and millions of pounds, which obviously is being sent to local authorities, spent out, but that's a lot of interest on that money.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the French system, if you look at Citio, they actually have, it's mainly focused on refill and reuse systems.
10% or something.
But they have a dedicated bit that covers in your fee that is going to this stuff.
Yeah.
And there are some benefits as well, because I always think it's interesting when we're talking about refill and reuse, and people are telling me, big organisations are telling me they're really committed to it. And I'm like, but yet no evidence of any collection or cleaning infrastructure.
Because all of this links back to what makes good recycling and how do we, we've got to think outside the box as to what is impacting stuff that will reduce its success and what is a distraction. And
maybe the question that the really real question we're trying to answer then is, we say, what is good recycling? Or maybe the first question that before we even get to what good recycling look like is what we what we trying to answer. What is the need effectively? So that's talking about, like you mentioned right at the start, for you, good recycling is not just about recycling, is the product even necessary, or is the packaging even necessary? So it's talking about that, and then it goes to if it's necessary, then yes, is it in a format it could be reused, refilled, or whatever? But then so then what's the recycling aspect right at the end of life? rather than does it need to have lots of different colours to stand out on shelf? Does it have to have a foil around it? Does it have block printing?
Yeah.
All this sort of stuff. Does it have to have every neon colour under the sun? Or actually, does it just need to do a very simple basic job, in inverted commas, because packaging's never simple, but does it just need to do that one thing and do it well? I mean...
And it's interesting, you look at Ocado with their refill stuff. One of the advantages Ocado have is people don't go into a shop and pick it off the shelf. And so are there other opportunities we've got about people not going into store?
Yeah.
And are there other lessons we can learn? So the amount of people now who buy regularly from Vinted.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say there is no stigma. There might be in some social groups, but not in any I interact with. There is no stigma about second-hand clothes anymore.
No.
None at all. So are there lessons we can learn? It might not be the same thing, but about how we change the behaviour and the approach for people to feel that responsibility and take that role.
And I think the Vinted example, Margaret, is amazing because there's still a disconnect. You still see charity shops full of clothes and people not going in, yet it's the same concept, but because it's branded as cool and Vinted, it's done that. And maybe that's something that Exchange for Change need to look at as an example of how do they to make get rid of the apathy, to get people moving is how do they make it cool?
Yeah.
Because that is a great example of that's online. Everyone's talking about it, but it's exactly the same product that's in a charity shop, but that's just got a handwritten label and they're empty. Yeah. So it's something definitely there's a lot of ways I think that shift can happen, and that was a really good example.
Vinted's the largest fashion retailer in France, isn't it?
Yeah, something like that.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy and brilliant, but crazy.
Brilliant. So fast forward 5 years down the line, what would be the dream scenario for each of you based on this discussion? Where do you think we will be at?
A realistic dream scenario?
5 years, or can we just be a bit more long term?
Long term, utopia, where would you like to see this discussion and being in reality in life?
I think for me, it would be that we stop talking about whether things are recycled or have recycled content, because that is our default. And so if you're going to put it on the market in the UK, it's going to have a percentage recycled content. It might vary depending on the use case. And it is going to be recyclable at end of life. Certain exceptions will apply. And then we can start focusing on some of the other sustainability criteria. And we can start looking at developing, proper circularity metrics that may be applied. Maybe we can start looking at carbon, things like that. But it's just that actually everyone knows it's recycled. So you don't need to worry so much about the claims, because that's the default. Yeah. And you're not going to claim it can be recycled because everyone knows it can be. Yeah. What are you doing better than that?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think, again, annoyingly, I'm going to agree with Margaret. I quite like that. But I'm also going to say, I think from a DRS perspective, because I think it is a divisive subject in industry. People either love it or they hate it. There's not really anyone in the middle ground. But I think if you're in the industry, you want it to succeed. No one wants it to fail. You could dislike DRS and the idea of and already think it'll succeed, but you want it to work, right? So I think regardless, I would love to see DRS be a massive success. I'd love to see really high return rates. I'd love to see it's going to sound really weird. I'd love the Exchange for Change to be financially unviable because everyone's claiming all the deposits back.
Yeah.
And because that's what they should also want, right? Yeah. It's like any charity like RAP who would love to not have to exist, but we exist because there's a challenge. Yeah. But there we are. So I'd love to see that, and I'd like to see as well, reuse and refill not be the niche.
Sure.
That's on a high street. That's slightly more expensive. Only to say we talked about middle class being the privileged ones who can use it, but because it's at scale in supermarkets, it's so much cheaper, and it's just part of every day. Maybe not for everything, obviously, because you can't have it for everything, but for a lot of cases, that's just the default.
Yeah. Thank you, Adrian.
It's great going last after these and these discussions.
It could be worse.
I think that Margaret and Adam are right, that we're not having a conversation about this. This is the default. And on refill and reuse, I'm a huge fan of that. And I remember as a child, a van used to come around selling fresh produce. Imagine a van coming round where you could go and refill your washing up liquid, your, detergents, and so you could have completely new mechanisms for, refill and reuse. And then that makes it more affordable to those on lower incomes. I can't afford myself a £15 refillable deodorant stick. I'm thinking, what? In a £8 replacement, that's beyond the pockets of a lot of people. I mentioned the figure earlier: a third of our population in food and fuel poverty. We have to have systems that work for them as well. And the ultimate goal is leaving a world that is resilient and that is future fit for future generations.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Well, thank you all so much for a provocative session. I really enjoyed it. I've also learnt lots, and thank you for all keeping the spring in my step to go off and build more of these facilities to deal with some of these challenges. So I really appreciate your time.
And thank you for some really good questions.
Yeah.
We had a great debate today.
Yeah. And for going off and building these facilities
Yes.
and
Yeah.
being so determined.
Yeah.
Thank you.